Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with Better a Witty Fool. This is going to be our series on a critique of presuppositionalism. Today we are going to be looking at Thomas Kuhn versus presuppositionalism. Before we get started on that, we have to understand who was Thomas Kuhn. Well, Thomas Kuhn was arguably the most influential philosopher of science of the 20th century. If not the most influential, he's definitely in the top 5. He is one of those credited with destroying or completely defeating logical positivism, a philosophical belief that existed in the beginning of the 20th century. I'm not going to get into what logical positivism is right now or how Kuhn destroyed it or was able to defeat it. I'll save that for another video. And finally, and most importantly, to this video, he was the creator of the Incommensurability Thesis and the theory of paradigm shift. If you ever hear someone talking about a paradigm shift or the existence of a kind of scientific paradigm, Kuhn is probably who they're eventually drawing from. So, to understand his theory of paradigm shift, let's take a look. So, according to Kuhn, there is a scientific paradigm that's out there that we all believe or subscribe to. And then that scientific theory is going to provide puzzles and tools to solve those puzzles. Scientists go ahead and use these tools to solve the puzzles until, eventually, scientists encounter a puzzle that cannot be solved using the tools, or there's something that can't be explained using the tools that are provided by the paradigm that we have. There's some theory that can only be explained by contradicting the paradigm. There's evidence that goes against the paradigm, something like that. Something happens to cause a paradigm shift or a revolution. Then we get a scientific revolution. This is a point where we're trying to come up with an opposing paradigm until eventually a new paradigm is established that replaces that scientific paradigm. It creates those puzzles and tools again, and we keep working in that new paradigm until we can come up with another scientific paradigm, or we can come up with another problem that causes a scientific revolution, and the process repeats itself. It's a big old cycle. To get a better understanding of this, let's take a look at an example. So, Newtonian physics was the kind of scientific paradigm for physics for a long time. It had the tools of Newton's laws of motion. Scientists went around and explained the motion of the planets and all these different things with gravity. Very useful. But eventually there were a number of experiments, such as the double slit experiment and the photoelectric effect, that showed that light was both a particle and a wave, as well as a number of other things that caused us to start to doubt or worry about Newtonian physics, that caused a scientific revolution, the quantum revolution, as I'm going to call it at least, which led us to believing in quantum physics, or having as our new paradigm, quantum physics, which replaced Newtonian physics as the paradigm model, and now we're working in that, or at least a marriage of quantum and Newtonian physics, and the cycle continues until we find a paradox or a contradiction or some problem with quantum physics, and we continue the cycle. This has been seen a lot throughout the history of science. Kuhn originally was a scientist as well as a historian of science, which is one of the reasons that he has this idea and conception of this kind of paradigm shift. The other piece that's important to understand in Kuhn's philosophy is the Incommensurability Thesis. This is saying that basically theories are assessed as compared to the current paradigm. Basically, a theory is assessed as how well does it fit into the paradigm, how well does it solve the puzzles of that paradigm, and how well does it use the tools of that paradigm to solve those puzzles. Some theories may fare better in one paradigm than they would in another. And in fact, some theories that were created in an older paradigm may fare better in a newer paradigm. All that matters is how well they line up, the similarity with the paradigm. The important part here is we can't objectively compare two theories, as they can only be evaluated in relation to a paradigm, in relation to kind of those values or that set of tools or puzzles that we're looking at the time. And paradigms are eventually going to change and have changed so much that there's no way for us to objectively compare two theories and say that one is better than another. We can only compare them to what we have as our current paradigm. With that in mind, let's take a look as how Thomas Kuhn might have objected to presuppositionalism, or some of the arguments presented in presuppositionalism. Once again, with all of these videos, I'm not taking this as this is definitely something that Kuhn would have said. I'm taking some of his ideas and trying to apply them to an interesting objection to the presuppositionalist argument. So, at the beginning, we were faced with the set of choices of absolute truth exists, absolute truth does not exist, I don't know if absolute truth exists, or I don't care if absolute truth exists. In this sense, we're going to go with the second option. Absolute truth does not exist. Now, we're going to say either this claim is true or it's not. If it's not true, we shouldn't have clicked on it, so we should pick something else. And if it is true, then it seems that absolute truth does exist. What Kuhn's going to say is there's another kind of truth we can be talking about. And in fact, it's the only kind of truth we can be talking about. It's relative truth, or truth relative to a paradigm. Kuhn's objection would go something like this. Theories can only be true in comparison to a paradigm. Relatively true. Absolute truth implies that a statement is true regardless of paradigm. That is something that's not going to work with Kuhn's paradigm, with Kuhn's beliefs. The statement, absolute truth does not exist, is relatively true under Kuhn's paradigm. So Kuhn's going to kind of sneak between the horns of the dilemma presented by the presuppositionalist. He's going to say, well, it's not technically true because it's not absolutely true. But it's not false that absolute truth doesn't exist. It's relatively true, relative to his paradigm. His paradigm says that theories can only be true in comparison to a paradigm, so absolute truth can't exist. However, the statement absolute truth does not exist can be relatively true. So he would sneak in a third option to say that a statement may be relatively true without being absolutely true. So we can hold the statement absolute truth does not exist is relatively true without holding that absolute truth need exist. That was Kuhn versus Presuppositionalism. Next up is Agrippa, Bertrand Russell, Saul Kripke, Quine and Goodman, Aristotle, Lewis Carroll, and finally, Carneades. Watch this video and more at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.